episode 2 of the Asian Skycast. For the moment, we're recording this at the Asian Sky Media Studio, which may or may not be Asian Sky Group's conference room in Hong Kong. So please bear with us while we find a more permanent location for these, or just blame our producer Bo and Zhang if there are any glitches. Our guest today is Mr. Wu Zhendong, who was one of the pioneers of China's general aviation industry. Mr. Wu is the founder and CEO of Avion Pacific, a general aviation services firm that consults for Western OEMs on selling their products in China. Mr. Wu was also recently appointed as the chairperson of ASBAA, the Asian Business Aviation Association, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. I've known Mr. Wu for a long time, and he's a fascinating man with a fascinating career. He got started in the early stages of Chinese general aviation, just when China was opening up in the 1980s. So it's a fascinating story, and I think interesting for anyone who is even just curious about China, regardless of your industry. Then later, we're going to talk more about the current state of the Chinese helicopter market specifically. We actually went on much longer than I expected, so we're going to break this up into 2 parts. Part 2 will run later in the summer, and that'll cover his experience selling American and European GA aircraft into China. We'll talk a little bit about what he sees as the potential for Chinese homegrown OEMs, and we'll also talk a little bit about what he sees for the future of urban air mobility in China or over the next 10 or 20 years. So that will come in part 2 later in the summer, so please keep an eye out. And just a final note before we get to Mr. Wu. We're going to try to do an episode of this podcast every week or every 2 weeks. It will be a rotating group of hosts, guest hosts, and topics. For the most part, we're going to focus on business aviation and general aviation in Asia, but we'll also mix in some urban air mobility and some economics and politics as it pertains to